Matthew actually begins his gospel with a genealogy of Jesus, and Luke also provides a genealogy in chapter 3 of his gospel, after Jesus has been baptized. Now, although Luke's version runs backwards from Jesus, which is an unusual thing to do, most genealogies run forwards from the most ancient ancestor. But it still doesn't disguise the fact that Luke's genealogy is very different from that presented by Matthew. So what is going on here? Christian apologists will wave off the problem with a very cute explanation. They'll tell you that Luke's genealogy is that of Jesus' mother Mary. So don't worry folks, there's no contradiction. Well, I have to tell you they're blowing smoke in your eyes. And I'm going to explain why the Mary explanation is wrong and just papers over a multitude of problems. It's amusing to note that the early Christians also all agreed that there was no contradiction between the two genealogies, except that they all agreed both lists referred to Joseph. The 4th century Christian historian Eusebius gave an inspired, if unsupported, explanation at some length. He tells us that 2 men married in succession the same woman and each fathered a son. Those 2 boys grew up and also both married the same woman. The result was Joseph. Joseph's fathers were both the Jacob found in Matthew's lists and the Heli found in Luke's lists. Well, believe that if you want to. Now, Matthew tells us up front that he's listing the lineage of Jesus. He begins with Abraham, the supposed father of the Hebrew people. He presents his lists in 3 chunks of ancestors. Abraham through to David, David through to Jeconiah, that's the king taken into Babylonian exile, and Jeconiah through to Jesus. Matthew then tells us that this is 3 sets of 14, making a total of 42 generations. Now, Matthew doesn't say why the 14s and the 42 are important, but I'm going to let you in on the secret. It's actually not about history, but about lucky numbers. Let me explain. Matthew's plan is to establish an ancestry between Jesus and the royal house of David. He wants to prove Jesus is of royal blood sanctioned by God himself. Now, David's name in Hebrew and written without consonants is D-V-D. Each Hebrew letter has a numerical value, and so that's 4 plus 6 plus 4. In other words, 14. It's a lucky number. It's 777, the number of spiritual perfection. And 42, of course, is 3 times 14. So Matthew's 3 blocks of names represent, in succession, the rise from Abraham to King David, the fall to Jeconiah and exile, and the rise again to Jesus. It's cute. It's almost poetic. But it has little or nothing to do with history. To begin with, all the patriarchs from Abraham through to David and beyond belong to the realm of mythology. But that's something for another day. But let's look at the second block of names where fable begins to overlap verifiable history. What we find here is that in order to achieve his poetic magic, Matthew simply omits 3 kings known from the 9th and 8th centuries BC, Ahaziah, Joash, Amaziah. And he also omits Zedekiah from the 6th century, actually the last of the kings of Judah. In other words, Matthew is more concerned to present his poetic magic numbers than to record the truth. But what about the third block of names that takes us from the return from exile to Jesus himself? Well, here we have the biggest problem. There were no longer Davidic kings, and the line was lost. The period begins with Jerusalem destroyed along with its temple records and Judah under Babylonian rule. This is followed by 200 years of rule by Persian governors, 180 years of rule by Greek kings, and a century of rule by the non-Davidic Maccabees, and then Herod and the Roman. Matthew at this point can no longer copy the king list found in the book of Chronicles, so the last bunch of names he gets from divine inspiration. In other words, he makes them up. But there is a final irony to this. Challenge any Christian you know to count the names from Abraham through to Jesus in the first chapter of the book of Matthew. The evangelist has actually lost count. In his final set of 14, there are in fact only 13 names. Matthew's divinely inspired 42 generations turns out to be only 41 generations. No wonder Luke had to reorganise the whole show. Now Luke opts for 11 blocks of 7 names, making 77 generations from Adam through to Jesus. The magic 42 generations are preserved now between David and Jesus. To achieve this, Luke adds a multitude of names drawn from who knows where. No wonder he turns his genealogy upside down to hide the mischief. But none of it is true. It's not history. It's more astounding rubbish from the New Testament.